Before we dive into the world of Yellowstone, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that like button if you're enjoying the content. As a fan of the show, you've probably noticed the intense rivalry between Rip Wheeler and Kayce Dutton. Their initial confrontation in season one was intriguing, but it wasn't until later that their animosity grew into something more tangible. In fact, their fights became a recurring theme throughout the series. Many of the primary characters in Yellowstone have found themselves at odds with each other, and it seems that just about every major character has engaged in a confrontation with another at some point. However, the cause of the tension between Rip and Kayce was not always apparent. By season 5, part 2, it's clear that Kayce and Rip have developed a strong sense of respect for each other and enjoy a positive relationship. Their bond hasn't always been so harmonious in previous seasons, but it's clear that they've both grown and learned from their experiences. The initial confrontation between Rip and Kayce took place in season 1, episode 6, which is called Kayce ventured into the forest on his horse, but the horse panicked when it saw a bear. To drive the bear away, Rip fired his gun. Rip then rode up to Kayce and made a snarky comment, saying, "You could get in trouble in a church, so you stood your ground, though, for once." Kayce replied, "I ain't used to seeing you off my dad's leash." As a result, they ended up having a small but intense brawl, which Rip emerged victorious from. Is that it was their initial altercation, but it certainly wasn't going to be their only one. In season 2, episode 2, their argument escalated significantly, leading them to engage in a violent brawl that left both of them severely injured. The initial conflict and strain between Rip and Kayce might not have been explicitly detailed, but it seems probable that it originated from choices they both made when they were together. We estimate, for example, Rip may have harbored some resentment towards Kayce since he chose to leave the ranch to enlist in the military. Then 632 displays that the Rip loyalty has consistently held a greater value than any other consideration. It's clear that Rip has devoted every aspect of his life to the ranch and to John, and so it's reasonable to assume that watching Kayce casually depart may have significantly eroded Rick's admiration towards him. Additionally, it's worth noting that Rip put in an enormous amount of effort for every dollar he made at the ranch, yet he fell short of the recognition he truly deserved. Project. On the contrary, Kayce, from an early age, found himself surrounded by affluence, authority, and all the land he desired. This might have stirred unease within Rip, given that Kayce's attitude suggested a lack of gratitude for these privileges. As a passionate cinephile, I can't help but notice that, from my perspective, Rip seems to unquestioningly obey John's commands in any situation, which feels a bit off-putting. It's not explicitly clear how it transpired, but before he joined the military, I observed that Kayce was marked. Detail that adds depth and intrigue to his character. Since Rip frequently took care of John's unsavory tasks, it's likely that he was the one who branded Kayce. Given that KA would undoubtedly resist. Such an action, another altercation might have ensued at that time. In another scenario, if Rip hadn't marked him, it might well have been John who took action, but it's highly probable that Rip would still be present, possibly even restraining Kayce. It's also worth mentioning that Kayce might harbor some bitterness towards Rip because of Lee's murder. In season 1, episode 1, it was Monica's brother who fatally shot Lee alone, whose Kayce might believe that Rip should have been with Lee for protection, or perhaps even in his place instead of Lee, given the extended period since their last encounter in season 1. It was only natural for them to resume their relationship from where it ended and demonstrate their trustworthiness towards one another again. In the second season, the conflict between them was rooted in an entirely different issue. By this point, Kayce had returned to the ranch for some time, but it's clear that he hadn't been there as long as Rip had. Instead, John opted to assign the foreman's cabin to Kayce, making it so that Kayce would live alone there and oversee all the cowhands. Besides causing pain directly, what added insult to injury for Rip was that he used to have the foreman's cabin and lead the cowboys. In essence, this situation amounted to a demotion for him. It's clear that Rip perceived himself as a superior and more qualified leader, which led to growing friction between him and Kayce. In the course of their fierce battle, Rip chose selflessness after they both became unconscious, recognizing that John desired Kayce to command the cowboys. Rip deliberately lost the fight, allowing Kayce to emerge victorious. This act resulted in Rip returning to the bunkhouse and resuming his ordinary life there, accepting a lower position at the ranch. Later on, Rip observed as Kayce transformed into a competent leader, deeply invested in the well-being of the ranch and its people. This transition earned Rip considerable admiration for Kayce. That respect was reciprocated by Kayce, who saw just how much Rip cared about the ranch and John. So after that point, the two worked closely together and have seen eye to eye ever since. As the show continues, it's likely that Rip and Kayce will appear together on several occasions, possibly even in a significant confrontation or climactic scene towards the finale. Indeed, there could be no more suitable person to pursue justice for John than Rip, the man whom John regarded almost like a son. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time, I am ETHC, what I bastard tech that to all the worlds was a single order